Good morning, everyone. So, today our presentation is going to be about the Gen Z perceived relationship between tokenism versus genuine representation in fashion. I'm Coletta Tia speaking right now, and Abigail is going to be presenting soon. So, we're going to get into the research statement as to why we're doing the presentation, go into our protocols, findings, then a discussion, and then our conclusion. So it should be pretty simple, and here's just a brief outline as to how we're going to do it.
For our research, we aim to understand the relationship between Gen Z and their perception of the fashion industry and its effects on their own consumer choices. We chose this because we felt like this was crucial, being that genuine representation and inclusion of what industries do or should strive for is a part of the idea of tokenism. So we noticed that there was a deficiency in our understanding of the role of tokenism and the promotion of diversity, which challenges these fashion norms. So we used a survey to help us approach and gather understanding from Gen Z students and how diversity and genuine representation is perceived in the fashion industry. I ran into an article by McKinsey and Company, which is a consultant firm. So they work with a number of different brands and also categories of entrepreneurship. And within this, they've seen that Gen Z and millennial consumers are very critical, being that they represent about 350 billion of spending power in the United States alone. And Gen Z accounts for 40% of global consumers. So when looking into this quote, we found that there was a large amount of Gen Z consumers, and they've noticed, McKinsey and Company have noticed that over the years, consumers have expanded their purchasing decisions to incorporate company values and views instead of just how the clothes themselves look or how the fashion brand appears on the outside. They're more concerned about the global ethos of these brands.
This data set basically talks about brand values and in diversity. However, it does talk about sustainability, and the sustainability part is in blue, green, and yellow, which we are going to disregard. However, brand values are important when people are buying clothing, and the purple part shows basically would they choose a brand that associates their values over any other brand. And basically this is really important because majority of individuals who were in this survey slash data set, they were more on the neutral slash agree side than the side that strongly disagrees or disagrees, which is really important because it's a strong emphasis on how brand values and diversity and inclusion can impact an individual to buy a certain product. In the third data set, we get into buying behavior construct results as to how certain brands who value diversity, inclusivity, and different identities can actually be important. And there was more of people who took the neutral standpoint as well and agreed to how this was important, but there was a lot less people who strongly agreed, which also shows less of an impact on how it can be. But majority of people showed more of a neutral standpoint when it came to purchasing decisions based off of their diversity values and how this can be important. We took a quantitative approach and basically we just walked around campus on foot asking students to fill out a survey, and these would be highly populated areas to where it was more of a diverse audience and it wasn't a cluttered group of friends or a cluttered class to where they could possibly have the same perception. However, there was a few incidents where there were groups of friends and organizations that we did give the survey out to, but it was very less likely than more of a random population.
We had a range of 4 research questions, and 3 of them led to interval data, while 1 of them led to nominal data. The questions are: on a scale of 1 to 5, how often do you feel that underrepresented groups are adequately represented in the fashion world? Question 2, have you observed tokenism in the fashion industry? That's a simple yes or no question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to boycott or avoid a fashion brand that fails to promote diversity? This was also a scale question. And then on a scale of 1 to 5, how important is the authenticity of a fashion brand's diversity when you're making the choice to purchase something? So when we found our data from these questions, we had a total of 101 responses. And so for the first question, we found that most students voted for the average number of frequency of representation, which was 3. And that led to the median becoming 3. But the overall average was 2.9 because the most answers were divided between 2 and 3. And then for our nominal data, we saw that many people answered yes, they have observed tokenism in the fashion industry, which to me was not shocking, but it was interesting to see the difference between the amount of students that said yes and the amount of students that said no. And we'll go into why we found that important later. And for our third question, we found that the median was also 3. Most people, 37 people to be exact, voted that they would boycott brands that fail to promote diversity. So as you can see, the numbers do kind of vary ranging from 37 people voting for the average amount of likeliness to boycott, and then 15 people voting for being very likely. Finally, for our last question, we noticed that most students thought that the level of importance for a brand's authenticity and their diversity mattered a lot in order to purchase something. Although the median for this interval data was 3, a lot of students voted for the level 4, which is close to very important, which I found very interesting because you're starting to see that people are thinking about not just the material itself, but the message behind it. So a lot of Gen Z is starting to internalize the different things that come within these companies, these big corporations. And so brand authenticity and the inclusion of diversity and representation is important for a lot of these SU students, or should I say Gen Z.
So now we're getting into the findings. And when it came to the findings, a lot of our data wasn't really cohesive and it did not correlate correctly as to where there wasn't a strong correlation. And over here is just a brief representation of how that shows. And we had to make our own data set of, not our own data set, I'm sorry, but more of a comprehensive data. And basically, I'll get into that. But this is just a failed data set that didn't really have a strong correlation. And it shows the relationship between boycotting brands and representation of underrepresented groups. This is our data set that is a bit more successful. I'm not going to say it hasn't very strong correlation, but it does have a stronger correlation than the last data set. And basically, this just talks about the importance of authenticity when purchasing something, and if the likeliness to boycott a brand, if there's a relationship between that. And basically, the nude/beige color is the importance of authenticity when purchasing something, and the black is the likeliness to boycott a brand with diversity. And basically, this shows that majority of the people took a neutral standpoint, and they actually thought that boycotting brands because they didn't show diversity was a lot more important, and the importance of authenticity and genuine representation was important, which shows that as an outlook, this data set actually was really successful because it showed a lot less of people who didn't find a genuine representation and diversity important. Additionally, as you can see, the bigger the dot, the bigger the representation. So a majority of people were more in a neutral standpoint, as you can see, and more on the right side.
After discussing our data, we found major points that we wanted to highlight about our survey data. We noticed that an average number of students felt that fashion brands adequately represent underrepresented groups, and we felt like this represents the diversity of Gen Z's perception in fashion. And this varies based on everyone's personal experience and also their environment. So it was interesting to see how the students felt that fashion brands do a decent job at representing underrepresented groups. We also found that many students, being 73 out of 101 participants, have observed tokenism in the fashion industry. This stood out to us because in our Sprint 1 and our qualitative research, we interviewed fashion designers, and those are people who are actually integrated within the fashion world. This time, we looked towards consumers, specifically Gen Z consumers, and we noticed that even though they're not directly related to fashion, they're witnessing tokenism, and this also affects the outlook on fashion brands. So this affects the level of support that these brands receive from Gen Z. Although they're not directly integrated with the fashion world, they are indirectly because their money funds these companies. And so we noticed that Gen Z being more likely to stop supporting brands because of the lack of diversity or gender representation is also indicative of the idea of activism within our generation. A lot of young adults practice activism of corrupt policies, brands, in all kinds of institutions and scenarios. You've seen this in examples of gun control protests or having walkouts during school sessions. Gen Z is very vocal, and because of this, a lot of the research that we found encourages designers and people who are within the fashion world to consider the viewpoints and the attitudes behind Generation Z, because we are the highest demographic of consumers within fashion.
When it came to our presentation and our quantitative study, we realized that a few points. First of all, tokenism awareness, and basically, a lot of we realized the Gen Z population does care a lot about brand perception and seeing how genuine representation can lack in this industry, and which leads into the second point that the desire for genuine representation is there in the Gen Z audience and it influences their brand choices. Also, the action misalignment is a lot of people were a lot more neutral than actually finding extreme importance in genuine representation. However, it is apparent and they played a neutral standpoint, which is better than playing a standpoint of I don't care and I don't find diversity of value or and my purchases of value either when it comes to diversity. Lastly, we found that this is an opportunity for change because fashion brands have the chance to bridge a gap between aligning with Gen Z values, which finds genuine representation and diversity important, and fostering meaning for that. Thank you for listening to our presentation and have a good day.
Thank you.